Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our final session for the two-day Face Race Summit. It's been absolutely brilliant seeing so many of you here and having so many interesting connections and building solidarity, building collectives, and really talking about some of these really really difficult issues that have been faced by so many in fashion education, in the fashion industry, learning fashion, and how we are trying to think of ways to address this. So thank you all for coming here. Thank you for everyone who's been online. To close the 2 days we've been here together, we've got some provocations. We're super excited to have insights from 3 rounds of conversation. So we're going to begin with Aja Barber, who is the author of the fantastic book Consumed. I hope you all have read it. If you haven't, please do. Absolutely brilliant book, and for students here, it should just be one of your manuals that you really use to help you get through college. And Semaan, who we're super excited, who's come over from New York to join us, who needs little introduction. He's been doing amazing work with Slow Factory, doing fantastic online courses where I've attended so many of them. You've got the Slack group that keeps the conversation going, and it's also been in residency here at Central St Martin's in the Legacies Gallery, and has got a whole world, a meadow growing in there under the project title Applied Utopias. So they're going to speak for about half an hour. Then we're going to be joined by Darren Miller of the Black British Business Institute. We're really excited to have Darren here. And then we're going to close with the group Bold, who are Andrew Ibby and Harriet Elliott, who are going to tell us about their work and really set the tone for the closing part of the night, which will be drinks in the Legacies Gallery. So do join us, and Andrew will be DJing too. So without further ado, please give a round of applause to Aja and Céline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanvir. Thank you to CSM for having us here as a resident of the school for this past week. We're so grateful for you. And thank you so much, Aja Barber. Aja Barber is one of our dear board members at the Slow Factory. She's also one of my closest friends. And as I was chatting with her in the gallery space that Tanvir was mentioning, we have an indoor meadow growing in there. I recommend you all go and roll in it and touch the art and take it home. And the idea of the meadow was because we're so far away removed from nature. We make these decisions on sustainability without any connection to nature because we are disconnected from it because we live in cities and because we are also, subject to colonialism, to these fences that are put around these parks and so on and so forth. And so we wanted to really bring nature closer to us. But as I was exhausted putting all this together, I said to Aja, oh my gosh, Aja, I am supposed to go on stage with Face Summit and I don't know what to say. And Aja generously said, I'll come with you.
I think it's always easier to have a conversation, particularly one with a friend. And so if you're not really sure where the conversation will go, pick someone that you can talk to for hours.
Which is the case, so watch out, we may go over 30 minutes. But also, as we were discussing, Aja, we were both saying how exhausted we were, and the topic of the summit, it's super important. Of course, it's mandatory. We should have this conversation all the time, but at the same time, it oftentimes falls on the shoulders of Black and brown people to have the conversation on race or to hold these difficult conversations.
And it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. Like the work that I want to do is sometimes thwarted by absolute microaggressions. If I think about if I could move through spaces without bumping up against the systemic issues that we are talking about again and again and again, how much more effective and impactful could I be in the work that I do? If I didn't have to worry about, somebody sitting with their back to me the whole time or closing me out of conversation, how much more could I get done? That sort of stuff really takes it out of people. And, even talking about it, I was chatting with my friend Andrew, who's in this room, and we were talking about how the conversation can even be tiring.
Absolutely. And for example, it takes a toll on our mental health. It takes a toll on our bodies. It takes a toll on everything. And I work really hard on my healing, on my personal healing. And I tell myself, I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. But I can't help but feel like I am sometimes because I have to work 3 times as hard as my peers just to be not even considered, because I also, like, I agree with
you. Over deliver a lot.
Over deliver and underappreciated for so many things. And the sad part is that it's also a microaggression to be discredited. It's a microaggression to be erased. It's a microaggression to be purposefully erased from a conversation. Or as you were saying, this week even, you were voluntarily being ignored by a white peer that knows very well who you are, and that you've purposefully blocked on Twitter because she's been very, very racist towards yourself, towards others. And here she was. She invited
in the space. And it's just like, wow, this is really meta. We're supposed to be unpacking all of this, and I am having it happen to me in the space where we're supposed to be unpacking it. Wow. That's the only way I can really look at it, because if I don't, I'll be in a rage. So like,
we were angry.
Yeah, you have to like hover above it and sort of like take it in from like a weird academic perspective, because if you take too much of it to heart, then it ruins your entire day.
Absolutely.
And it brings down the energy of the room.
And we were in that space where we were both very sad, sort of, bringing the energy of the room down yesterday.
Well, I was also really hungry.
Yes.
I needed to eat. And then I was like talking about this like low-key microaggression that I experienced. And then I was like, and then I ate and I immediately was like, okay, I feel better.
It's true, but it does take a toll on us, right? Like, we've had so many conversations where it's exhausting. And as Toni Morrison said, I'm not going to quote her, but I'm just going to paraphrase, that it is such a distraction. Racism is a distraction. It takes us away from our work, takes us away from our art, from our well-being, from our lives. And that is a distraction. Like, what if we had a conference where we talked about what we actually want to do outside of the white gaze? How are we outside of this gaze that constantly puts us in the box of you're too much and you're trying too hard and this and that, and so that's what we wanted to discuss.
Or even like conversations about like, I tend to be very, very I don't throw around the word decolonize, right? Because it works in certain specific incidences, and I'm very much aware of taking up too much space in certain conversations. But I do feel like the fashion industry has sometimes been like, let's decolonize things, but then there's still these barriers for entry. There's still these gates around certain subjects. There's still, guarded topics that you can't even talk about. Like, recently we had a passing in this country, and people were being piled on for talking about the colonial legacy of this country. And that I saw that in the fashion space. So how are we decolonizing if it's still a subject where it's no-go at certain times? You know what I mean?
And even in 2019, when I came to Central St. Martin's, my first time doing the study hall here, and the opening speech that I gave was around, the legacy of colonialism in the fashion industry. And I remember the room tensing up, because I feel like it was the first time they've reckoned with that idea. On the stage, we had you and...
you brought me on, and then I just went even harder.
And we had also Alan Solway, who is an Indigenous artist based in the occupied United States. And it was also the first time I feel like most of the folks in the UK, not the black and brown folks, but the folks in the UK who are from here, who are Indigenous from the UK, lol, we're very surprised to see an Indigenous person for the first time. And so that was also something where I felt was stressful for me to hold. Like, I hold a lot of that on my shoulders. And the other thing is that talking about social justice in 2020, and except for the Palestinian people, but everybody else is okay, but not the Palestinian people, because that is literally one of the hardest topic you can have in a conversation, talking about the liberation of the Palestinian people, my people. And that is very, very hard. And as soon as people find out I'm Arab, it's immediately this very anti-Arab sentiment that's like, yeah, bye. Okay, like, no, you got in here, but now you're out, because it's such a difficult political topic. It's a religious topic. And it's not that complicated. At the end of the day, it all boils down to colonialism, and we have to discuss it like that,
Yeah, I just feel like we're barely scratching the surface sometimes, but then also people want to give out awards for like barely scratching the surface. And I'm kind of like, okay. It all feels kind of bizarre sometimes, to see people particularly use the language of liberation in a consumerist society intrinsically tied to capitalism. It's really bizarre.
Absolutely. And again, just to say, we're talking about solidarity. We're talking about this uprising of our human rights, and in that we must perform ourselves into it. I was talking about that recently on a class for Advaya about this idea of women and power and what is our identities. And at the end of the day, in all these representation spaces that we get to be in, we squeeze ourselves in, and then we have to represent our identity in its full spectrum. So I found myself like dressing in abayas from Lebanon because I'm Lebanese, and I was like I'm calling my mom, please get me the traditional jewelry, and she's like, what? Like, no, that's like Halloween costume. What are you doing? And I was like, no, because I have to represent. She's like, you must represent as you are. Like, you have to own the idea that we have been colonized and this is what we dress like, because there is no one manufacturing this anymore. So
there is a certain element of performance, and like, don't get me started on the social media aspect of it. For those of you that follow me, I have a platform and I tend to keep the ads to a minimal. I would say that my Instagram is about 98% unsponsored, but every now and then I'll do something goofy just for myself, and then like, a brand will be like, ooh, can we get something like that? And I'm like, no. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I do enough dancing in some ways, and I could do it for myself, but I'm not going to perform that for capitalism. Like, piss off.
And in the other sense also, we're talking about more women of color in position of leadership, more women of color in the C-suite, and then you get invited to advise the C-suite, okay? And then there's no follow-up after that, or a woman of color rises to the C-suite and then she has no support. In fact, she's being hated by her own peers. Yeah. Because I also talked about that recently in a talk about power and women and all of that stuff around.
And you see that repeated everywhere. I've seen that with like my mom as a teacher, and seeing Black principals who, find themselves in this position where it's like, oh, yay, we put a Black woman in this position. Great, knives out. You know what I mean? And that's something that we see repeated. I remember a few years ago when there was an unfortunate advertising campaign with a fast fashion brand where they put a little Black child in a hoodie that said coolest monkey in the jungle. And the conversation on Twitter was, this is what happens when there's no Black people in the room, which true. But what happens when you put a Black person in the room and they are too scared to tell you that you are about to shoot yourself in the foot? Because that definitely happens to marginalized people. We get put in this place where we're expected to be the moral compass of like basically don't crap the bed. But then at the same time, we're not listened to. And if it pushes too many people in a direction that makes them feel uncomfortable, then we have to look out for ourselves because you're getting pushed out the door. And these are the things that we don't talk about enough when people are like, diversity and inclusion. Look, we put a Black person in this position where they absolutely cannot win. And the minute they talk about something that makes us slightly uncomfy, then everybody turns against them. And before you know it, they're out. Or we put them in an impossible situation where it's just done all out mess, and it's like, great, fix it. What? How? What? Huh? So like, it is something to be said to put marginalized people in spaces but not give us the tools and not give us the support to actually help to create tangible change.
Because at the end of the day, as we know, racism is the water. That's the system. It's all in it. So yes, you're going to put someone in there, or you're going to invite someone at the very
You're going to invite Soul Factory and then tell us that we're way too radical.
Exactly. Or I was just going to say about like inviting us too late in the process, where we're like, you're already getting white people talking about indigeneity. Okay. You're getting white people talking about, material science. Okay. And you have 3 Black people talking about race. Okay. But I know Black people who are talking about indigeneity because indigeneity is also Black. And I know, indigenous people who are talking about material science because material science is indigenous, So why are we just in a secluded sector where it's like, okay, you guys talk about race. Or when I would be invited, you talk about colonialism, talk about colonialism. And it's like, okay. And then I'm just sweating like, okay, colonialism, everybody. And it's unfair because we have so much more to give. We have so much creativity, and most of our creativity comes from our ancient wisdom, our ancient knowledge. And then here we are secluded in a corner. Fix it. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's, no, it can't. I can't.
Yeah, totally.
And actually, when we call each other, because I live in New York, she lives in London, this is how it sounds like for hours.
Yeah, no, you're literally listening to one of our WhatsApp voice notes right now.
And then we would just vent because it's so important. And recently, Slow Factory has partnered with a dance company called New York Live Arts, and it's run by Bill T. Jones, who is this 70-plus-year-old Black gay man who has changed the narrative on dance, on contemporary dance, which is a very wide space, okay? And he has worked so hard to just be seen as a contemporary of so many white dancers that are, you know, I mean, I don't know. Contemporary dance is not, I've never been in that space.
Contemporary dance, I'm ballet, and ballet is still white.
No, I took my kids there and they're like, oh my God, what are they doing? And they're just like flipping around on the floor, acting crazy. And then my kids were like, I do contemporary dance. I'm like, yes, it's free form. But it was really like out of the box, like out of like very, very unusual performance. I was like, okay. And long story short, in working with them, he was saying that he's worked so hard and he sees us like the Slow Factory. And what he really loved in working with us was how much of the underdog we are in our space, because he is also still like he's
constantly fighting
so hard, and yet we get this much of recognition. And he, anyway, we rant also when we meet, so. And so in the space of fashion, I don't know, you know, we're talking oftentimes about, again, as you were saying, decolonizing, and it's always...
We can't be using these words if we're not going bolder. That's really it. Like using the language, and maybe that's just the system of capitalism, is that everything gets turned into a commodity of lukewarm nonsense, essentially. But I just have found it extremely frustrating to be invited on, like, I don't do the panels that start with like decolonize, but then like the sponsor is like underwritten by someone who is still colonizing the land and resources of people in the global south. Like, what are we decolonizing? You know, so yeah.
But all that to say is that it's intergenerational, right? Like it's intergenerational. We have people in their 70s, people that are young, like we are all trying to break this mold that exists, this system. And when we come to fashion, we're hoping to go beyond the aesthetics, okay? We're hoping...
And we're not the first ones to do it, and we won't be the last to be in this space either.
We're providing the blueprints, the seeds, the experiments, like build upon what has been done. But
we got to wrap it up, so we got to go to questions at some point.
But state your sources. State your sources was my last point.
State your sources.
Because that's what I was going to say, is that it is intergenerational, and many people have done it before us, and we are doing it now, and many people will do it after us. So as you are building upon the work, please state your sources, because that is the way to keep the thread going.
And there's nothing lost in that. I mean, we've seen, and I think we see that sort of like in, you know, cultural appropriation, right? Like taking a little bit from this culture, but not actually inviting the culture to be a part of the design process, or not actually, if there's no shift in power, then what are we actually doing that's different? That's really it. So like when people ask me what's the difference between like cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, I'm like, is the culture that you are including, do they actually feel uplifted and included, and is there a shift of power? Because if there isn't, then it's appropriation. You know, it's sort of like I don't know, giving something to someone that they don't really want, that doesn't benefit them at all, and then asking them to be grateful. One of the things I talk about a lot is like gifting. Every holiday season, I'm like, stop buying people presents they don't want, because we have a waste problem. But anyways, yeah, we should wrap it up and go to questions.
Great. Wow, 30 minutes went by so fast.
Are there any questions? Questions?
There's a microphone there for questions. This is so special because really this is an intimate conversation with one of my best friends, and I can't believe that we're having it in front of everyone, which is kind of.
And I didn't know that I was going to have this conversation today, so there's no makeup.
Come with you.
I'm like, okay, I'll do it because I love you, but I'm not prepared. But okay.
No, but this is very intimate, and these are the conversations that are important to have. Oh, that's what I wanted to say about Bealty Jones, is that the talk is the medicine. The talk is the work. What we're doing here is the work. So that's important.
Questions?
Oh, hello, I'm Céline. First of all, I want to say that was so incredible. I could sit here all day and listen to both of you. The question I had is, how can we be radical, restful, and regenerative in our collective liberation, which also centers disabled people? Because disabled people are the world's largest minority. 80% of disability is acquired in someone's lifetime, and also disabled people face the most harsh impact towards climate change, and we're often excluded from these conversations as well. I think it's critical, and one really important fact that most people don't even recognize is the impact on disabled, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. For example, in the US, more than 50% of all police brutality is of Black, disabled people. So this cure attack will be radical, restful, and regenerative towards collective liberation that centers interdependence and love. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What's your name? Tell us your name.
My name is Semaan.
I thought it was you. Because we have collaborated on the Applied Utopia piece that is, so we have made our first textbook at Slow Factory, and Suleiman is part of the Applied Utopia textbook. It's available at the gallery. But you are so right, and thank you for recentering this conversation around disability justice. And of course, as able-bodied humans, we have no idea about that. And oftentimes we have been schooled and we have been taught by yourself on social media and even by email. And that's how we met each other, actually. And we were like, yes, you are right, it's true. And the work that we're doing at Slow Factory is trying more and more to be inclusive of disabled spaces that we don't even belong in. So it's also a delicate balance of finding the right way to enter that space, finding the right way to welcome folks. We, of course, have American Sign Language available, but even that, the deaf community is like, we're not disabled, we're disabled, we're not disabled. So it's like all a cultural movement. It's a cultural movement that, in working with more and more disabled activists, what we have discovered is that we're talking about slowness and we're going so fast, and myself included, like we're not even set up to be inclusive of disabled spaces. We're not even set up to slow down because we are just running nonstop. And so that is a lot of unlearning that we have to do in our spaces, and actually slowing down, actually being sustainable, with the first step of including disabled activists, disabled writers, disabled designers. And as we were starting to do it, I was, gently schooled by like, Céline, you run 20 million miles an hour and you're called Slow Factory and there's nothing slow about it. So how are you going to do that? Like you don't have room for disabled designers. Disabled designers need more time and you have to slow down. And I was shocked. I was like, what?
Because it's tied to capitalism. And I struggle with the same thing. Like, it's this idea that like all of this comes back to like capitalism and like, yeah. Sorry, continue.
No, thank you for that. It's true. Like, and also as immigrants, we're like when I was young, like resting in Lebanon, it's fine. There's like this culture of farniente and resting that's very welcome. But here, we're not allowed. We're not allowed to fuck up. We're not allowed to make a mistake. We're not allowed to rest. We have to go, And so that my interactions with the disabled community has been only healing for my own self and how I grind, how I hustle, how I am hard on myself. And I have learned so much to on that. And I think that to the
I
disabled
think it's
community.
a lifetime of unlearning, especially while we exist within these systems. And it's something that I constantly come back to when I push myself in ways that I know are unsustainable. And then I do it again. And I'm like, what are you doing? By the way, I'm so tired. I'm going home and going to bed after this. But it's something that I have to constantly circle back to in my own message, because I think it's going to take me a lifetime of unpicking, to be honest.
So one more thing I just want to say out loud in public. So, at the Soap Factory, when I do a mistake in public on social media, I'm not the kind of person to say, hey, you are terrible people, why did this? So I sent an email to Céline and to the team, and I cannot tell you how loving and generous and open the response was from Céline and the team. I think we just need to center everything back to love. And Auntie Maya Angelou has an incredible quote which I live by. He said, do the best that you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. And I think the Soap Factory is a huge example of doing the best that they can every day. So, huge thank you to Céline and the team.
Thank you so much, Suleiman. You're the best. Thank you to Nicole and Paloma and Josh who are in the room, and to Colin Vernon who was on stage yesterday. Thank you. Honestly, it's a whole team effort. And as Suleiman said, we had posted something about like get off your screens and go into the real life to protest. And because we were just tired of like the performance on digital social media of like, I'm an activist, it was just like it's not doing anything. But we received an email from Suleiman and from other folks actually from the disabled community that really put us back in our place, and we're like, this is harmful for our community because we can't go protest and we can't go on the street. We need to be on the digital spaces. Mobilizing digitally is important, and you just discredited us, and we're like, shit, take this down. Okay, let's talk about it. What should we say? What can we do? Can we hire you guys? And so that's how it started. So thank you so much. And we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
We are hugely pleased to be joined now by Darren Miller of the Black Business Institute. Welcome. Who'll be in conversation with Karen Franklin, one of the co-founders of FACE. Thank you. Please join your hands together and give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tanvir, so much for promoting me. You've done that twice today, actually. I'm simply a member of FACE, and it's a hugely valuable experience as a white academic in terms of learning, but thank you. And I'm thrilled to be here. I'm stepping into Sharon Lloyd's place. She's really worked very hard, and Darren, Sharon's chosen guest, and having listened to you speak before, I know that the information you're going to convey is really valuable. So I just introduce myself, and we do a little audio introduction as well. So I'm Karen Franklin. I've worked in the commercial fashion arena for around 40 years, and latterly a lot more as a visiting academic. And a visual description, I've already told you how long I've been working. So as a white woman, I've got long grey hair, and I have big dark glasses, and I often wear large earrings. Darren, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Darren Miller. I'm the co-founder of BBI. It's the first Black Business Institute in the UK, set up soon after the killing of George Floyd, on the back of a conversation between myself and a Swedish entrepreneur, actually. And we were just talking about that brutal, heinous act. Topical conversation back in summer 2020, but the conversation could have been a 5-minute conversation, went on in the end for 4 hours. And at the end of those 4 hours, we believe that we definitely had passion, similar ideas and some values, and some brilliant initiatives about what's really going to make a difference. And that's what gave birth to BBI. So that's what BBI, that's how it came into being. BBI, we're really trying to challenge racial injustice through business enterprise. And we especially believe that entrepreneurialism leads to social mobility, and that social mobility is a key component for levelling society. So that's a little bit about BBI, just an introduction. I'm a born and bred Londoner, grew up in Southeast London, and as an entrepreneur myself, I've done really well, but always got to a point in my career where I faced systemic and structural barriers, and mostly it's to do with funding, trying to access funding. So that's the real focus of the organisation.
Thank you, Darren. And do you want to do a little audio description, just so we've got that of yourself and the way you look for?
An audio description?
Yes. Is this the first audio description? We've been doing them for the last 2 days.
Description before.
Just for people who are tuning in, who are listening only.
Well, I'm from the West Indies. My parents are from Jamaica. I'm 6 foot tall. I'm 6'2", fair skinned. But as we say in Jamaica, out of many, one people.
Thank you. So, and having heard you speak quite a few times, you're a polymath, you're inspirational, with a podcast that has been nominated for quite a few awards, and we'll speak about that a little bit later. So the origins of BBI obviously came from something which shocked everyone. What was it that galvanized you to then focus on, right, BBI is going to be the result of that, the Black Business Institute?
Well, it's really trying to get to the nub of the issue. When we think about the way the Black community is portrayed in the UK, it's lots of negative stereotypes. And a lot of that comes from the fact that there is wonderful talent in the UK, in every sector of society, including the Black community. But in order to go out there and achieve greatness, one needs to be able to access resource. And so that's a really important thing.
Okay, and so you began doing that. So tell us a little bit about the sort of challenge for the UK's Black business entrepreneurs that are specifically aligned to race, that are in fact unique.
Well, it's really about the funding networks and the funding structures. So, for instance, if one wants to raise money, you really have to be tuned into the system. You need to know the right people. You know, very often it helps to go to the right schools. And we know that in the UK, Black people are more likely to go to a comprehensive school rather than a private school. So these are all problems, not plugging into that system and not having the know-how, knowing the language and how to meet the important criteria. That's really important.
So I want to just check that we're going through your PowerPoint as you like it, because I know you've got quite a specific set of images. Shall we move on to the next one? Yes, do, because it is studio lights up here. Very hot.
So yeah, generational wealth, I think that's really important to look at the Black experience from a historical perspective. We know that people don't always want to talk about the past. I think they think there's a stigma in talking about the past. But if we think about the loss of generational wealth, generational knowledge, we have to look at slavery. We can't get away from it. And from the 1400s to 1833, when slavery was abolished, there was close to 500 years of knowledge, experience, father not being able to pass information down to son, mother to daughter, and that's had a retarding effect on the Black community. And so even though people think it's something that's very historical, the impact is still here today. I mean, not many people know that the slave owners were given this incredible boost of 300 billion in terms, equivalent of 300 billion in terms of compensation. The slaves were not compensated, so that's really unfortunate. That loan was only repaid in 2015. So it's all very recent. Another important piece of information, the last transatlantic slave, his name was Sylvester McGee, died in 1971. So if you think about passing down generational knowledge, generational wealth, if you look at that family, he wouldn't have been able to do that. And that extends to lots of families. And if you need us to carry on with the slides, do just say next slide. Next slide.
great.
And so then you start to look at the systemic barriers and how those barriers really impact and how they come together to create this systemic structural wall, which is hard to get beyond. It starts with education, not being able to attain great education, not building those networks. And then once you leave school, you haven't got a great job, so perhaps you haven't got a great credit rating. That stops you from being able to buy a property, and without property, then you can't go on to give the bank what they need, which is that security to give you a loan to start a business. So the whole thing comes together and you end up with this massive structural crisis. Next slide. Well, that's just going back to what I said, and this really speaks to what happened in Bristol with the toppling of the statue. I mean, these the former slave owners, when they were compensated, they were able to really recast themselves as philanthropists and give back to charity and start institutions and so on. But that wealth came on the back of a barbaric system, slavery. So that's important to note. Next slide. You asked me, Karen, about the challenges faced by Black entrepreneurs, and this is one of them. There was a survey that was conducted in November 2020, and it looked at where capital had gone over a 10-year period. And when they looked at all of the different groups that received funding, and they looked at Black entrepreneurs, they only attracted 0.24%. That's the funding they managed that went to Black entrepreneurs versus others. If you can go to the next slide, and you can see all the various groups and versus the Black community. The survey revealed that there were 38 successful entrepreneurs, and they got the equivalent of £36,000 each per annum over a 10-year period, which is hardly enough to start a meaningful and successful business. So that's really important to note. Next slide. But I mean, there's, since the killing of George Floyd, there has been focus on diversity, equity and inclusion. But the equity is the really important part, because equity is about recognizing the journey of the individual. It's about recognizing we all have different starts, and when comparing person with person, it's a little bit like in a race. If you look at when people line up for a race, they don't line up. The race is staggered, and the reason it's staggered is to take account to make it fair and to make it even. So equity is really important, and often that's not taken into account enough.
And it's this sort of entrepreneurialism that you believe leads to the social mobility that we all desire. So those specific areas of focus for Black entrepreneurs are what?
Do you mean in terms of the businesses they focus on?
Yes, in terms of their process to succeed.
Well, very often Black entrepreneurs end up being entrepreneurs because they haven't been able to sometimes succeed in a corporate structure, in a company structure, and it's frustration. Out of frustration, they leave. They hit a glass ceiling. They know they can do so much more. They have incredible ability, but the systems and structures are not allowing them to fulfill their potential, so they leave. And so very often it's true, they haven't had any formal training, but they have a natural ability to be inventive and to recreate, and that really impacts in every sector. It's multidisciplinary. I mean, you've got incredible entrepreneurs in technology, in fashion, in beauty, in health, food, you name it. So there isn't any particular area where there's a concentration, but there is growth in all sectors. Well, just going back to that slide a minute, just focusing on the importance of diversity. So diversity is something that should be embraced, and it's starting to be embraced by all big businesses or progressive businesses, because they realize that you want to avoid groupthink, and it's really important to have individuals from different backgrounds come into a business and bring in fresh ideas and innovations. Imagine if you have a group of people who have never been exposed to management before. They haven't been systemized, and so they don't know how it should be done. So they're coming to the table with wonderful new ideas, and that's the benefit they can bring. Companies who embrace diversity and inclusion, it's been proven. Harvard say it, if you're got a cognitively diverse team, much better for problem solving, for driving innovation. McKinsey reports more profitable. So diversity is something that should be embraced by all companies who want to have a future.
And that's something, again, that's been reiterated over and over in these conversations, especially in terms of education. Everybody benefits, don't they?
They do indeed. They do indeed. And what we try to do, at BBI, we try not to have a cancel culture. We try to embrace, understand that people are coming. It's a broad church, and it's full of sinners, to be quite frank. These are some of those sinners. I mean, these are the people that have come forward and they've said, okay, we love your message, we like what you're doing. We've got people like the Financial Times have been amazing, Coutts Bank, the V&A, British Fashion Council, British Beauty Council, all of them, one way or another, are lending support to ensure that we can chart a different path for the future.
And have you found that there have been unexpected names? One could predict.
I think they're all quite unexpected, to be honest, because if you think about the Financial Times, one might expect that to be the Guardian, but it's not. It's the Financial Times that came forward and gave us practical support, gave us a budget, a six-figure sum that we could use how we saw fit to advertise our initiatives. So yeah.
So tell us about the initiatives that you're working on.
Well, if you go. So these are some of the partners that are powering what we're doing, and rather than just talking about what should be done, and we're beyond talking, we are trying to put practical initiatives into place that really transform and drive, make a difference for entrepreneurs. I mean, and the way we've adopted, the stance we've adopted is what we call a win-win strategy. So we know that, and I was saying to someone just today, if you look at it's Black History Month, and there are so many companies that I've spoken to, well-meaning companies, who didn't even realize it was Black History Month. They're not celebrating it. They don't really acknowledge it. And so what's going to keep them interested? It's not necessarily the moral argument or the social argument, it's money, and there's nothing wrong with that. So win-win is really where we make it clear that the Black community has to be seen slightly differently. Like other communities, the Black community spends lots of money. It spends 300 billion every year, according to the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, and there's another 24 billion untapped. That means there's an incentive for companies to work with organizations like BBI and try and court the Black consumer. There is a monetary return, and we don't mind and similar story, if you look at America, the spend in America has just gone up. I think last time it was about 910 billion, now it's jumped to 1.6 trillion. So huge amounts of money are being spent by Black communities around the world. And, in return, those communities should be respected. And these companies should pay for access rather than just taking creativity, appropriating ideas. It should be done in a more respectful and equal way. So that's what win-win's about. And that's just an overview of all the different snapshot of the value of entrepreneurialism in these different countries. So we're speaking to these big brands and trying to convince them to look at the Black community in the same way they look at other communities like China and India. Black communities are the same. We're a source of wealth, a source of progress, and a chance to have an equal partnership. This in the UK, so Coutts NatWest recently did a survey, and by not making access available to the black community in the UK, it means the black community is not realizing its potential. And if it was to realize its potential, it could add another 75 billion to the UK economy. And we all know that the economy is in some trouble at the moment. And I think we're just about to get a new chancellor. I think we've got a new chancellor.
So throughout the 2 days, clearly there have been catalysts, and the murder of George Floyd sort of pulled focus for the world on racial inequality. Time passes, and I wonder, do you feel there are challenges to keep people fully engaged? And obviously the figures that you've given here are a direct challenge to white investor perception of there not being the markets. So that's one way in which you're doing it very effectively. Are there other ways?
Well, yes. I mean, we want to realise the potential, the deep reservoirs of talent in the UK, and we want to give people who have been overlooked a chance to make a contribution. And we do that through different initiatives. One of our initiatives, we're working with SOAS on what we're calling a mini MBA, and that's a chance for people who haven't had any sort of formal training in the past to to learn some basic business principles, so they can go on, start their business and develop those businesses, and in due course scale those businesses. But this is a few of our initiatives. So we have a podcast. We launched it last year. The very first episode was the story of Christo Brand, and I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Christo Brand before. But Christo Brand was the jailer that looked after Nelson Mandela for the last 12 years of his incarceration until he walked to freedom. And it's an incredible story, because Christo Brand wasn't to know that Nelson Mandela would walk from prisoner to president. I mean, it sounds like something out of Hollywood. And but he did. When Christo Brand joined as a jailer, he was just 18, and he was told he was looking after this dangerous villain, one of the most dangerous men in South Africa, and instead he found this man that was already in his mid-60s, a very meek and mild-mannered man. So he didn't see what the danger was, but he realized he was special. When it was his birthday, he got 50,000 birthday cards. So he said there was something unique about this man. So he got to know him really closely. Cut a long story short, they became best friends, and he became a mentee of Nelson Mandela. And something he did really risky. Nelson Mandela was missing his family. He'd been incarcerated for 27 years in total, when his children were becoming adults and having their own children. So one day he smuggled one of Nelson Mandela's grandchildren into prison. And, Nelson Mandela was really touched by that. And he remembered. So when he did become president, he soon after, within weeks, he invited Christo Brand to join him in Parliament, and he did. So it's an extraordinary story. But we also, talking about how we transform fortunes, we're working with Sotheby's at the moment on something called Brilliant and Black. So what Sotheby's did last year, they got behind black jewelry makers. And people didn't even know black jewelry makers existed, but they do. And so Sotheby's gave them a platform to sell their product internationally in 2021. And they did it again in 2022. And we've done a podcast where we interview some of those jewelry makers and an editor from The Economist. And then this is our flagship project, where we are effectively, it's almost like a department store, a pop-up department store to give black entrepreneurs an opportunity to sell their product. But it's more than that. It involves training with SOAS. It's a really modern, forward-looking platform, working with Farfetch. And yeah, it also involves art as well. Go on to it. So that's it. Basically, it's a department store. It's the first time it's ever been done. It doesn't exist. I mean, we're still trying to get to the finishing line, but when it does launch, it's the first time anything like this has existed in Europe. It's going to have hospitality as a key focus, and recasting African and Caribbean food in a sort of more contemporary, aspirational fashion. And also a focus on Black art, contemporary Black art, creating a platform for Black artists to expose their work without going through the gallery system. So coming to an end, you know, what we try to do, we try to extend ourselves. You know, we have to take risk in order to drive change, and remember, don't look for new ideas in the same old places.
Thank you very much, Darren Miller. I think we might have a brief moment for questions. Has anybody got one for Darren? And the mic is coming down. When you've given this talk, oh, we've got a hand going up. Thank you, Harris. So, gentleman here for the mic, if you would come down. It's there.
Thank you for what you've had to say. Do you work intergenerationally? Because very often when finance is procured for new businesses, often the reflection is on those that are just emerging out of university and startups, but there's often a lot of people from the Black community who have ideas across the generations. And so in terms of your initiative, do you work intergenerationally as well?
Yes. In fact, what we're doing with the initiative, our flagship initiative, which is called New Wonderland Emporium, that's actually for early stage businesses. And what I mean by that, established businesses. It could be any age. It's a business that's trading for at least maybe 3-4 years, and they've mastered their craft. And so they're ready for scale. So that's the kind of people that we want to get behind. Because there's quite, you know, sometimes it's like in all things, if you find yourself in the middle, there's no support. So we want to support people who have gone through the hard sort of like early years, made the mistakes, and they're now ready to grow their business proper.
And people can contact you how? Is there another question? Anybody want one? How can they contact you, Darren?
So yeah, it's just Darren at blackbusinessinstitute.com.
Simple. Anybody like, yes, one more, and then I think.
Yeah, hi, thank you for sharing. So with the Emporium, is it a long-term venture? Is it a permanent venture? Or is it a pop-up? And I asked that in regards to the businesses that do engage with the space, what happens afterwards? You know, are they able to sustain their work?
Yeah, so it's we're looking to make it into an annual pop-up every summer, open for 2 to 3 months. That's what we're just refining the duration. But in terms of continuity, this is where the partnership we're coming together with Farfetch, it means there's going to be this online proposition which is there constantly. So it's best of both worlds in some respect.
And if you've got a moment, just talk about the sort of architectural plans, because there's a lot of work gone into that, hasn't it, to make it a really high-end space.
Yeah, I think that I remember having a conversation with a very prestigious developer, and we were looking at some space and what to do with that space, and we were working with some incredible architects, and they came up with this wonderful design, and the property developer said, Darren, this is too aspirational or too high-end. And I think there's a lack of appreciation that in the Black community, like other communities, there's lots and lots of aspiration and people want the best. So what we've done, we've managed to get a cohort together of 7 architects that are helping us to design the space. So when we take the space over, it's going to be beautifully designed. You know, some of the designers we're working with have worked on shops like Selfridges.
Thank you, Darren. I'm just looking at the organisers. Are we to time? Okay, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much, Darren Miller.
Thank you so much to Darren and Karen again. That was absolutely brilliant. And, you know, really so much information there, Darren. So lots to think about. So thanks again. So we're coming to the end of our 2-day summit. Lots and lots to think about, but our closing provocation is called "There is Nothing New about Black Fashion Culture, Legacies of Black Style and Fashion." We have Andrew Ibby from Liverpool John Moores University and Harris Elliott from Central St Martin's, and they'll be talking about BOLD, Black Oriented Legacy Development. Please give them a warm welcome.
It's not only the two of us, there's also Francesca Lake and Amina McConnell.
Okay, so amazing. That's the first thing I'm going to say is absolutely amazing. The summit's been incredible. So many new things to think about. So many new provocations, call to arms, actions. We've seen academics next to industry players. We've heard about business, retail. We've heard about new projects, old projects. So for me, as one of the founders, I'm absolutely blown away, quite emotional. And it's been really difficult actually to keep to script, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try and do this one. So we are going to talk about a project that I think has probably been in conception for as long as I've known Harris Elliott, which is how many years, Harris?
Probably nearly 20 years.
So about 20 years. And we've been talking about Black fashion culture for an awful long time, its impact on the world. Globally, we're beginning to see it permeating everywhere now. But this is actually quite an old conversation. So post George Floyd, I had a conversation with the British Fashion Council and specifically Caroline Rush, actually. Not about what we're going to do tomorrow, because that's a given, of course, but what about everything that went before? You know, what about those stories and narratives that we don't know about? You know, have we given enough thought to our contemporaries, the people that paved the way? And we've called this the missing thread. The missing thread is, as I say, an exhibition that myself, Harris, and Jason Jules, a writer, has conceived, and will be at Somerset House in autumn 2023 and run till 2024. It's a big project, and it really charts that space that's kind of missing from our narrative. So, you know, let's say from kind of 1975 to around 2005, all of that period where Black culture, Black style culture, fashion, art, politics created a foundation for the voices that we're seeing now. So I have Amina, who's a researcher on the project here, and Francesca, who's a new voice. I just heard Harris talking about intergenerational conversation. So that's one of the things that we're really interested in, is filling in those gaps so that we can all understand how this jigsaw puzzle that's been lost and missed, because many of our voices were restrained, let's say, if not cut out of the conversation. You'll see a quote here by Joe Casely Hayford. Now, I'm guessing that most of the people in this room would know Joe Casely Hayford. Yeah?
I only heard two.
Stick your hand up if you know Joe Casely Hayford. Okay, right.
Amazing.
You're wearing Joe. That's fantastic. So am I. So am I. So for me, this is a really important point, is what was missed. This room I can see is full of people with a great mixture of faces. I would expect us to know Joe Casely Hayford. But in other spaces, actually, there'd probably be one person. It might be someone like Tanvir, who's a historical or contextual senior lecturer that would stick their hand up. Everybody should know about Joe Casely Hayford. So Joe said, in the limited vision of white society, to unapologetically acknowledge my blackness is to diminish my professional role and social cultural contribution. And you imagine he said that in 1994. Okay, that's a long time ago. Could we go to the slide number 2? That's my introduction. So I'm going to talk, I'm going to hand you over to Harris, actually, to just talk a little bit or to elaborate on what I've said there.
Whenever we need to contextualize anything that we put out, especially within the academic space, and academic as well as the gallery space, it's very much about thinking about why something is relevant and why we need to share these things. It's just not the what. And very much the way that I speak to my students here, my question is often the why to them. And so why now? We all know why now. We know it's the reason why now is because this story's never been told before, and how we're referencing off and inspired very much by Joe Casely Hayford, and Joe and his wife Maria, who have ran the house, and we start at 1975, and their journey started at 1975 at Central St Martin's. So this institution is very instrumental to that story and to that legacy, but that story hasn't been told or referenced by this institution in that way. And so in that moment that we've got this cover from British Vogue from earlier this year, the fact that Edward is at the helm, Edward Enninful is editor-in-chief of now not only British Vogue, but many of the Vogues around the world, the fact that he holds that position. And I also just wish to reference the fact that he doesn't only hold that position because it's topical or trending to have a black face at that title, but he was previously at W magazine, one of the most influential fashion magazines, which is based in America, and he increased the revenue of W magazine by 12%. So his appointment at British Vogue wasn't just the fact of tokenism, but actually as a financial magnate, he's somebody who could also bring new revenue to a magazine which was failing or becoming quite dated because it didn't represent or reference so many of us who are in the room right about now. So this story is relevant now because of many stories that haven't been told, which riff back off of what Darren was just saying, and that the cultural capital of black people, which has been overlooked for so long, hasn't been recognized or referenced. And to the business detriment and to capitalist detriment, it's quite stupid, because actually you've actually missed a huge trick by sidelining black narratives. You've actually also lost out on a lot of revenue. So the point of telling this story now is actually about giving credit, giving back, but also being able to reference actually the importance of why black cultural capital within fashion as an industry and as an institution needs to be referenced today.
So I'm going to give my microphone to Amina, and I'm just going to, as an amazing researcher, just your point on legacy, really, the importance of legacy.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Welcome, everyone. So as a researcher on the missing thread, as I've gone around and I've done my interviews, I've become a lot more present and aware to the importance of legacy, because with the stories that we are uncovering, we've been in contact with many practitioners who are turning 70, and you have a lifetime of creativity, copyright material, who now need to be thinking about how they're managing their archive, because their archives are actually creative assets that have wealth attached to them. And for me, I really feel that legacy, when we're creating and we're making, begins at concept level, because then you're thinking about, okay, I'm creating this piece, I'm going to show it here, I'm going to go into a contract with the institution, but how am I managing the copyright on that piece of creativity that I've created? How am I, as I get older, archiving my work and ensuring that the copyright is managed effectively when I pass on? Who am I passing that copyright to? Am I taking my archive to an institution that is going to make my work visible when I'm not here, but also the wealth that is extracted from that copyright by the institution. If it's not managed effectively, it doesn't go, the generational wealth does not pass to your family. It stays with the institution. So for me, through the research that I've been doing on this project Legacy, is just as important when we are creating. To be honest, it's something that we really need to consider. And, you know, coming to do this talk, I was thinking that if any of us are in contact with elder practitioners who we know have a body of work, we need to start talking to them, because we know some of them are straddling, you know, being born in an analog generation with then dealing with technology. And, you know, with some of them that I've spoken to, I've asked them, do you have an archive plan? And to be honest, the answer has been no, you know. And then when we engaged in the conversation, of course, it becomes overwhelming because it's a lot to think about. But I would just encourage us to start talking to practitioners that we know, that we treasure, and we know have a body of work, because, you know, their wealth is locked into the legacies that they'll leave behind. So that's what I wanted to say on that.
Hi everyone, my name is Francesca. I'm from Kingston, Jamaica, and I'm studying on the MA Fashion Women's Wear program here at CSM. I come from graduate diploma fashion with David Capo, which was an amazing experience, and that allowed me to continue my education here at Central St. Martin. For me, I think my perspective on legacy, or I should say actually a bit of background. My background is in cultural studies from the University of the West Indies, Kingston, Jamaica. And my perspective on legacy is about our stories and kind of how we can continue to add to that. So my perspective is really about, you know, how, as a Jamaican creative, you know, what is the, if I am in Jamaica and only telling that story back to Jamaicans, then our stories only stay within that incubator, you know. So how is it that I can traverse telling those untapped stories on a global scale? And for me, a big part of the struggle is that being a Caribbean designer or an artist that has something to say, it's been really, I never had an example essentially of how to navigate my way into this industry and being able to kind of tell those stories on to the world, so that it doesn't just stay telling it back to other Jamaicans. You're just telling them what they know or about their lived experiences, and how can we kind of spread that. So I think by me being here and kind of navigating my way through this kind of industry or this space, and wanting to kind of use my undergraduate and this idea of cultural experience and marrying that really with my lived experiences, I think it's important that I set a blueprint and an example for people after me of how we can kind of traverse our way through this industry. I think that it is important just to add to our legacy, so that the untapped stories of Jamaican culture, with regard to my experience, don't just stay within that community.
Gonna bring in Harris. This slide says for real, right? And when we say for real, what we really mean is real talk. And when we start to talk about real talk, and we start to think about fashion and the excluded people of fashion, we start to really think about the impact of racism on many of our careers, many of our careers, and how we were kind of kept out of the conversation. Funding, if you ever have the opportunity to really reflect on someone like Joe, you'll realise that received no funding from the BFC at any time, was self-made, was a business that sustained itself and had no support from the industry, and continued to practice at the highest level. So when we really talk about the missing thread, we're not messing around. It's not going to be nice for some people to really reflect on how black fashion practitioners and artists, designers, stylists, photographers were treated during that period, and how many of our careers were curtailed, if not blocked. And I'm looking around the room and I can see people of that generation, and I can see their faces, because we did go for jobs at Burberry, and we did go for jobs at Mulberry, and we did go for jobs at Reiss, we did go for jobs at Donna Karan, and we did have these opportunities. We were treated really badly in Milan, and we're still going, we're still here, and we've still got stories to tell. So I'm going to ask Harris if he wants to add to that, or have I said enough?
Maybe I don't think enough can necessarily always be said, and I think a lot will come out in the exhibition, and us working with the House of Casely Hayford and listening to some of Maria's accounts about some of the struggles that Joe had to go through, because very often within fashion we look at things through the tipping point of what we see through journalism. So we see the celebrated moments that are printed, or now those moments are digital. And we all know that we live vicariously through those moments. We make these huge assumptions that because somebody's had printed work, therefore they must be doing really well. But speaking to a woman who worked tirelessly with her husband and seeing how he was sidelined and he wasn't supported, it becomes really painful, because the assumption is that because the house is a recognized name within the fashion industry, that actually they must be doing all right. But then actually the realities of the amount of editors, some who are still heavily working today, and influential people who are very influential, who many of us know within this room, were never that supported. And I'm not here to kind of kiss and tell, but just the realities that went on, that people that, I mean, I studied interior architecture and design, and the only prominent designer that I knew of when I was studying was Joe Casely Hayford. And so that quote that was at the beginning was off the back of a talk that Joe did at the ICA in 1993 with Edward Enninful. And it was from me coming back to London to be able to interview people for the dissertation that I was writing on black style. And so the icon, one of the few people that I could reference was somebody like Joe. And so the idea that we're telling these stories, and the whole process of doing this exhibition has actually been really cathartic and actually really painful. We had these long drawn out conversations, which essentially what we want to do is have a celebration about the contribution, but trying to get to that point of celebration, we still go through a lot of turmoil. And what was meant to be 1 hour meetings, the last one was 6 hours, so these processes are drawn out, and what will come through will be a really powerful exhibition that we can all actually hang our hat on or beside. But actually the process of going through this, essentially what is missing, to trying to dig that stuff up, actually becomes, as much as it's annoying, it also becomes quite painful.
There's more missing than we believed there was to be missing as well. So these 6 hour meetings are because, you know, we unravel something. We unraveled a thread of women designers, for instance, in the 90s, black women. I mean, come on, can you think of any? You know, go on. It's a tricky one. Moni, she's in it, don't worry. Jackie Rayburn's in it. Yeah. 2. Can we think of white women designers from the 90s? Well, we don't even need to start that conversation. So we're digging deep, and if anybody has people that are not on our radar, it's a tricky one. But that missing thread becomes even more missing, and it's how do we uncover those conversations? Because guess what? There were women who were black in the 90s who were designing, right? There has to be. There was. Yes. There you go. Welcome. So the real talk, and then this is the next thing, is the intergenerational conversations that we're having. So how does the missing thread impact tomorrow's thinkers like Francesca? and stars like Bianca, Nicholas Daly, Saul Nash, Martin Rose, slightly more established, but that intergenerational conversation. So how do we do that, Amina? So how do we bring Charlie, for instance, into the conversation?
Charlie Allen. Well, we go out and talk to him, basically. But Charlie comes into the conversation because he actually represents a dynasty of creative excellence. His fantastic father had the foresight to make sure all his sons had a base in tailoring. So Charlie, Joe, I think Aaron's an accountant, but there's two others.
Johnny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Johnny
so
Allen.
there's five sons. They all had a base in tailoring. Charlie branched off, so he added, because he's actually a master of design, and he, to be honest, design really excites him. And I've had some really wonderful conversations with him. Charlie, his work has touched popular culture across the decades, because some of his first work included doing seats for the Tourists that went on to become the Eurythmics. In his portfolio, there's many popular culture people that he's worked
Francesca, how important are these intergenerational conversations to you? Or how important are these intergenerational conversations? So Amina's been talking about Charlie Allen. How important is it for you to understand that legacy, and what would that conversation sound like if you and Charlie were sat together,
Well, I think for me, it's really important in terms of the retention of our culture, and just in terms of the knowledge that we pass down and are able to kind of work with not just people within our discipline, but also across intergenerational, also from other disciplines and local artisans and things like that. I think it's really important to just maintain and going back to this idea of legacy and how we can kind of maintain the conversation so that we can kind of continue to push that narrative forward. And by using kind of platforms such as We Are Face and working with different organizations that are there to kind of help to support us, I think it is important to maintain that communication amongst and across generations in order to push us forward.
Fantastic. We got another slide? We do, don't we? Okay, so those who were previously seen as a disadvantaged minority have developed a unique vision. A new combination of talents has emerged from the fertile ethnic exchange of cultures. Increasing numbers of Black people have this capacity to draw from and enrich both cultures, whereas the reverse is impossible. The majority culture has never felt the need to educate itself fully, nor enrich itself with anything other than the Western ideal. 1994 ID. Number 24, Real Talk. We'll also be exhibiting the Joe Casely-Hayford archive, as selected through Maria Casely-Hayford, who's a true and fierce custodian of all of the work from 1975, right through to his passing, and beyond, with of course Casely-Hayford and the legacy continuing. Harris, a comment on that? How important is that?
essential. It also links into what you mentioned yesterday at the beginning of the summit, which was the fact that the libraries were creating a library, and so initially in digital format, the Joe Casely-Hayford Library, and that came out from the idea of the celebration of Joe, but also the way that Joe works. The way that Joe worked and the way that he incorporated many different facets into his practice, and the way that he would draw and reference from context. Almost the idea, there's a famous quote online that Nina Simone talks about, that artists need to reference what's going on around them. And you yourself know, as somebody who worked with Joe, the first person that would employ you was a black designer, was Joe Casely-Hayford. The way that Joe worked with you, and the way, talk about what that was like working with Joe when you first started.
Well, that was the education. That's the only education. It was like working with a Jedi master. So, I cannot begin. I mean, I'd done quite well. I was graduate of the year, and at that point in '96, and on my way.
Actually, can I stop you before you go further? So you can continue. The fact that you, and most people don't know that Andrew became Graduate Designer of the Year. And so part of our conversation about the missing thread is that 2 years around that, Christopher Bailey was Designer of the Year. Kim Jones was also Designer of the Year. Where are they both now? We all know where they are. And the idea of Graduate Designer of the Year, what that used to mean, that would be your fast track or your trajectory into the industry. And you spent a number of years unable to get a job. The first person that would employ him was Joe Casely-Hayford. So that sets a bit of a context. Now you can obviously continue with
I was quite good
working with Joe.
So I was quite good, I'm not going to lie. It was a long time ago. Going from that environment of believing I was really good actually to working with Joe was another level. And really, I should have walked into any job after that. It's like working with McQueen or with Westwood, or you can put any name, Yogi, Com. The work that we used to see, the editorials that we'd see Casely-Hayford in often featured, Dries and Comme des Garçons and Yamamoto. It was before Raf Simons. It was before Raf. I remember seeing Raf coming out and me going, oh my God, who's this new Raf Simons guy? A peer, a competitor. Joe went off to do Givenchy for Gives and Hawkes, and at the same time we had Oswald with a very brief stint at Givenchy, but we're going to uncover some of those stories. Why did that one go wrong? And we need to know. So we're going to find out. So it's an amazing future-facing project. We'll be working with a lot of the new young designers, the new talent, producing new works. So, we don't want it to be a museum procession, very contemporary, very immersive. Time collapses. We can't be completist, as we say. We can't tell everything, but we can definitely reposition the importance of Black fashion culture.
Through the idea, almost looking at Afrofuturist principles, the idea that we're working with some of the contemporary designers of whom we're all aware of, and we're in conversations with them at the moment. And we've created a timeline from 1975, that point when Joe and Maria met here at St. Martin's, through to the early 2000s. And that timeline is an inspirational timeline which we've put together. So it's from our perspective, and there's many things quite heavy to the humus, from the New Cross fire in 1981 through to Who Shot JR, which is a bit of a contentious joke. Yeah, which is a contentious joke within the group. But we've created this timeline with the notion that the contemporary designers that we're going to be working with, for them to be able to pick something from that timeline, or maybe even not, but from that reference point, and that had they been aware of some of those knowledge points, or had the thread not been missing, what would they create? So whether they create an image, or whether they create a garment, or whether they create a film, the idea that they can reimagine that future. And so we were going to stop the exhibition probably in the early 2000s, just before the advent of digital and social media as we know it now. But the Somerset House were really keen that it was kept up to date. So working with them, we thought, how do we continue to tell this story and keep it up to date? And it's by working with designers to be able to reimagine that future through what they create, but they're not prescribing that, but what they would be. And the idea that from a cultural perspective, we've always worked on the fringes. So one of ours, we have a series of zones. One is nightlife, one is home, one is tailoring, one is performance. And we look at that laterally as well as literally, and the idea that how people can reimagine themselves through this timeline and recreate. And as we had to work laterally, because we were often excluded from the institutions, our education system often came from the dance floor. It might have come from the church, it might have come from the community centre, it might have come from the marketplace. And so therefore, how we would reimagine, and so the way in which we teach students now to look at their references, we always only had to do that because we weren't allowed in those spaces. So we're allowing people to kind of reimagine their futures and move forward in that way.
I think we've run out of time, haven't we? We got 15 minutes.
We've got time for questions.
Yeah, 15 minutes. We got 10 minutes. Sorry, I'm facing the wrong way. 10 minutes. So let's take some questions. I mean, it's we've obviously got some contributors to the exhibition, but let's take some questions. Oh, microphone, Manny. It's Manny. Manny needs the mic.
Thank you very much for sharing your stories and journey with me and with us. I'm still Manny, senior lecturer here. I was moved by the intergenerational conversation because I think that's very important too. I just want to ask about the ingredients that would make that happen, because for me, I can talk from from a queer identity. I'm not a generation that lose friends and families through HIV, lucky enough. But I lost friends through overdose and chemsex pandemic. And I'm certain that different generations will suffer different trauma. So just wondering for you, what's the ingredients to enable intergenerational conversation to happen effectively?
Amina, do you want to? Yeah. Amina, I'm going to allow Amina to, you can take this question, Amina.
I think, with intergenerational, I think one, we just have to be open to it. Then going out and connecting with people through this project. I think because I naturally moved through an intergenerational community, it was easy for me, to be honest. But I think at the end of the day, talking to your peers, getting them to ask who they connect with intergenerationally. It's really important because at the end of the day, many of us are branches of a root. Do you know what I mean? We're not the root, we're the branch. We've come from somewhere that connects us to our origin and our culture and to families that we've inherited, that we're born with. So I think at the end of the day, it's reaching out further to your community, putting that word out, taking the time to make new connections as well, to be honest. I hope that I know that in the exhibition that we are going to make the space to have intergenerational conversations, because there are so many exciting practitioners who are turning 70, who've done a body of work that some of us are just not aware of, but they have contributed significantly to the creative and cultural landscape here in the UK from the time that they arrived here, to be honest. So I think it's reaching out as much as you can, really, and just being open to reaching out.
So part of our process has been initially starting to think. We were starting to think about the contemporary designers and having their inclusion. And then we've had to sometimes revise the way that we would be putting the project together. So as opposed to going through those that would garner more press, but actually starting to think about some of the designers who are actually missing and giving them that platform again to be able to be part of that contribution, because otherwise we just fall back into that trap of actually let's just herald and highlight those who are already gaining lots of press, but actually for us to be able to shed light by not only showing an archive image, but giving them the space to be able to design something and actively be part of that conversation.
So I'm going to be bringing back a designer from, we're going to be bringing back a designer from the 90s that's just disappeared into obscurity. But I know this designer is unbelievable. So we're really looking forward to seeing, what comes of that space or what we can pull from that space. So a lot of conversations and a lot of this actually, sitting with Francesca, this panel is an intergenerational conversation right now, but really important for our roots and for the development specifically of our Black identity or Black culture in fashion. Have we got another question? The front.
No, I just had a little note, and I just want to show my gratefulness to listen in, and also throughout these 2 days, it's just been amazing. And I think also speaking as a white person and understand the white privilege, I think I can speak to the white people in the room that is so important to listen. And it's so important to understand that you will not be speaking for someone else and you're going to leave the space for that. And I was really touched by Ricardo's film yesterday, and it's just very important, and I just want to highlight how important it is that you all speak up as well, and I'm very grateful for being part of this. Thank you so much.
That's real talk right there. We got another question. Stunned into silence.
One at the back, or two at the back.
So this is to Amina. You spoke about archives and being kept in institutions. But you said something that I just want you to possibly expand on if you can, that if people were not keeping the archives in institutions, where would they keep them? Because are you saying they should keep them in their houses? I just want to sort of, if you could expand on that, please.
The thing about archives is that I'm not saying that they shouldn't be kept by institutions. But I think that before you get to the institution, I think you need to have a clear plan of how you want that archive managed and handled by the institution. Because as far as my knowledge goes, is when you gift an archive to an institution, it becomes a gift to the nation, and then you have no more connection with the archive. I think that there is a practitioner who's on Instagram, and his name escapes, I've forgotten his name, but he has a program called Decolonizing the Archive, where he basically introduces practitioners into the very basics of building their archive, and then building a plan, and then having a clear goal with how you want your archive to be handled by an institution. Because to be honest, if you spend a lifetime, doing your practice, and then you give your archive to an institution, then it's up to them when they decide they're going to make it visible. And then without you, the stories are lost, the connections are lost. So I think at the end of the day, it's progressing things forwards. It's a joint partnership between the person who's built the body of work and how they then develop their plan if they choose to put their archive with an institution. Of course, in terms of it being conserved, preserved, and then publicized, then yes, institutions can be the best place to put them. But I think there's other ways that people can think about managing their archives going forward. But I think the point that I was also really touching on was to think about the wealth generation that is attached to archives. Because I think in this time and this day and age, we need to think more closely about that, because the wealth is locked into the copyright, to be honest.
Another question? Go on, Karen.
Thanks so much, team. So much to learn there, and such key points about the wealth and the way in which that is has its own importance with individuals and the representation. And I think that Tilda really did well foreground what the question in me was by talking about the importance of the visibility of the conversations. And this is clearly going to be a really important event, stroke show, stroke piece of education, and that it should have longevity, that I'm presuming that it will travel, it does sort of stay in the public sphere, but I'm also just observing that we have permanent exhibitions in the V&A which look at the history of European fashion, and that this exhibition has such importance that it does automatically suggest permanence. And I don't know if there's any thoughts you'd like to add.
Harris. I thought you might do that. We have talked about. I mean, it's kind of almost a bit weird in the early stages of creation to be able to then predict the response, and then obviously from an archival academic point of view, as a resource and as an entity in itself, it will have its own merit. We have talked briefly about the idea that how the missing thread might travel. We've started conversations with a couple of institutions in West Africa of recent, and so the idea that an aspect thereof or the whole exhibition might start traveling. In terms of the ideas of permanence, we would definitely be open to that. But yeah, it's still really early stages. I mean, we're 11 months away. We're still heavily involved in the creation and the uncovering, as well as creating the new works. But we're definitely open. So if Darren and the Black Business Institute wish to get some money for us, seeing as that he was talking about earlier, we're totally open to that conversation.
We've got time for another one. We've done that really well. Who's got a question? David.
It's a really important one, Andrew. What's the first record you're going to play at the party?
I've been figuring it out. It's got to be Fela Kuti, because there's an anniversary there, and I think it's going to be expensive shit. So yeah, we got that one. And I've got a question for you, David. I know you were a prominent designer with a label. You know, we might need some of your archive. Does it exist?
Harris has already cornered me on.
There you go. You see. So we're actually sitting in this audience. It's amazing, and we're still going. And I'm thankful that you're here, and that Harris is here, and Amina's here. We've somehow kept going.
Let's go and dance.
Let's go and dance. Thank you.
And on that note, we just want to thank everybody for coming and for making it such a brilliant 2 days. Please do join us in the Letter B Gallery. There'll be drinks and DJing from Andrew. Thank you, everybody.